Okay, so today is the 5th day of Teves, the 5th of January, and I need to make a little retraction. It's not a total retraction because I'm still hoping that I figure it out. But I've been saying that this whole thing with the tefillin is what's causing. It's like the mechanism behind this idea that's called mach shalit al halev. Meaning that the Amalek that like clings to the back of the nape of the neck is like disrupting the mechanism. But on page 96, in folio 96, side B, I started researching it more deeply. So he seems to be saying something a little bit different. I may still be able to figure out a mechanism here, but it doesn't look like he means the mechanism. So let me read it again, this time stressing the way I think it needs to be read. So he said, where are we? We're on 14a. And here, okay. So it says, God will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. How should we understand from generation to generation? So it could be understood as row upon row. And what he means by row upon row, meaning that Amalek is disrupting all the seder ishtanshelus, all the order of reception and giving from one partzuf to the next, from one persona to the next, in the spiritual, in the soul. And in each one, what it's disrupting is again this idea that the nahi, the habits, the ingrained practices, the habitual, becomes the mind of the partzuf underneath. We said this is the example we gave was that parents and children, that what the parents think is not relevant to what the child's going to receive. What's relevant is how they behave. Their behavior is what they really pass on, and they'd like to think that they pass on what they think, but the child can't see it. So what the child sees is the behavior. So this is called the nehi of the higher, the netzach hod yasod of the higher level becomes the mochin, the intellect of the lower level. And at each stage, there exists the aspect of Amalek which opposes this. It doesn't let this happen. So this itself is called, what he's going to say now is this is called this type of giving from the habits to the mind is called itkafia. Itkafia. This is coercion. Why? Because the mind is not being transferred. What's being transferred is it's almost like imposing your actions upon the next generation. It's not, there's no explanation there. Now, as a person grows older, you need to add the explanation also, and that's why I wanted to add the tefillin into it. Because I thought that the tefillin would be like a mechanism which matures this whole thing. But it seems to be, as he's going to say in a moment, that this is not what's going on. That all of this is what we call mach shalit al halev. This is a general name for the mind controls the heart by coercion. It's not because it has a good argument. It's not anything like that. I was hoping that there's a mature version of this, but it seems to be that there's no mature version. It's just that this is the way it's hardwired, and this hardwiring is what affects from generation to generation also, or from level to level in the soul. So all these types of transference of the energy, which is from the habit to the mind of the next level, is like a mach shalit al halev, is like some kind of coercion on the heart. Except here, the heart is just the next level. It's not really necessarily the heart itself. He's generalizing this whole concept. At each stage, there exists the aspect of Amalek which opposes. It opposes this transference, representing the brazenness that resists the triumph of holiness. And what we mean by the triumph of holiness is netzach, is the netzach, nitzachon hakdusha. When you say nitzuach hakdusha, nitzachon hakdusha, what you're saying is the victory of holiness. So that's netzach. So what are we saying here? That when the man who fought with Yaakov hurt his netzach, what he's hurting is his ability to transfer this, call it the conduct, the normal way of doing things, and so on. It's like the heritage. He's preventing the heritage from passing from generation to generation. So, for instance, this is something that happened to many Jews when they came to the United States. That for centuries they had kept their heritage, and then suddenly, in one generation, everything's cut off. And you wonder why, because heritage was never based on necessarily understanding why you do things. Heritage is like, this is our custom, this is how we do things, and there's no, sometimes you understand, sometimes you don't, but most of the time you don't understand, you just do what your parents did. So what happened? Why was it suddenly severed? So he's saying this type of cutting off of the heritage, that's Amalek. And the opposite force, which is carrying the heritage from generation to generation, is this power of netzach. This is what netzach does. Netzach is like, it's like what allows the heritage to pass from generation to generation, even though there's no explanation.
That might be why the Alter Rebbe fought Napoleon so hard.
Right, of course, 100%. Because
that was, he
right,
realized that was the...
That's going to break, and he even said that.
Did he?
Yeah. That this is going to sever the passing of the heritage from one generation to the next. It's going to be better in some ways.
Right, he saw both sides.
Yeah, he knew that Napoleon, what he represented, but he also saw him as completely someone who was bent on destroying customs. Now that's exactly what all of liberalism is, because liberalism, even though it has a good side to it, which is necessary, it comes at the expense of heritage. Now, there's a lot of reasons for it, and we're not going to talk about all of them. The one that I like the most is the one that Francis Fukuyama brings in the End of History. And there he discusses the fact that you can't have a liberal democracy if there are all these customs running around, because these customs are nepotistics. They're based on a special relationship within the family. And he says that doesn't work, because in a liberal democracy you want everybody to be equal. So you can't have this nepotism running around. So really, the moment you cut that down, you cut it down in many, many ways. And one of the ways is, of course, that heritage is cut out. And, there's a lot of good in that, because the customs of the non-Jews are terrible. Some of them are really terrible, especially in Islam. But same thing in Christianity also. And so the Rambam says at some point they're going to come to the conclusion that their heritage was mistaken. They shouldn't have been passing this down from generation to generation. This was not a good thing to pass down. They're not good customs. But what he neglects to say is that when this sword cuts through society, it cuts through everyone, equally almost. And so Jews are just as susceptible to the sword as anyone else. And so Amalek, in that sense, is affecting everyone. He's not just trying to cut down the Jewish people. He affects everything. Everything that has to do with this type of transferring of energy from one generation to the next, or from one level of the soul to the next, Amalek is at war with. And the opposite of that is called the triumph of holiness. The nitzuach hakdusha, which is the principle of the mind ruling over the heart. Again, why is he saying it's the same thing? Not necessarily because of the mechanism. Again, I'm not completely retracting, because I think that there's still something in the way that I explained it, that he doesn't mean something about this mechanism, but it needs to be studied, whether we can really say there's a mature version of mind over the heart. Here it just means that mind over the heart is the general title for when something is done out of coercion, it's not done because I understand something better or not. The child doesn't accept the customs because everything was explained to them and said, oh, these are good and positive customs. They accept it because it's sort of forced on them, just by the fact that they live in a certain house. And this is the secret of the mochin, the intellect that are formed in the lower level from the nehi of the higher level. So this type of mochin, this type of intellect is not really intellect, because the child cannot explain to you why the custom is like this or like that. In fact, even if they could explain it to you, meaning even if you knew and you explained it to them, it wouldn't register still because they're too young.
Yeah, sometimes
so what they get is the heritage, and sometimes the parent, and usually the parent doesn't even know either. So this in general is the name is it falls under the title of itkafia, coercion, or another nicer name for it, let's say, is what the Zohar calls moach shalit aladiv, that the intellect controls the heart.
The
but
coercion is not necessary. It's a power of term here.
Right. It's not meant to be that I force it.
Yeah.
It's just that when you do something in a certain way with a child, they don't understand why, and that they just do it because that's how it's done. In the same way that they eat with a fork and a knife. All these are all customs. These are all things that we just accepted as given as part of our growing up in a certain civilization, a certain society. So this is the secret of the mochin that are formed in the lower level from the nehi of the higher level, explained above. And this is the essence of the war against Amalek. And so he says it works both ways. That the stronger this ability to transfer from generation to generation, and that's what he means here, from the war with Amalek, he's saying,
Dor, yes.
Midor Ledo means that they fight the transfer from one generation to the next. That's what Amalek is trying to disrupt. They're trying to make sure that even if you had good customs, even if you followed God very nicely, you can't transfer it to your children. And that's why it's a generational war. I mean, we usually understand it, it's forever. This war is forever. It says if you want to say forever, as milchama Hashem la'amalek le'olam, forever. But it says from door to door, meaning from one generation to the next. That's where the crux of the battle is, because that's what they're trying to disrupt. So that's what Amalek does. So it's any kind, but even what he's saying is even in the individual, in the soul itself, there are many levels, and many of these levels depend on something being transferred without explanation. Just that the energy is transferred without your fully understanding why it's transferred. Okay, so this is where we'll end today, and God willing, continue tomorrow.